What's radical about healing is that in order to heal, first of all, you have to know the truth.
I would like to start with a song that my grandfather taught me that he knew when he was a child growing up in Poland. Music is what kept him going throughout his entire life, and music plays a central part in his story because his incredible singing voice is one of the reasons why he survived the Holocaust.
I ended up working at Central High National Historic Site, which is the site of the desegregation, as a interpreter, like a tour guide, an educator, for 10 years. So I met with the communities that were involved in the Central High crisis. We did an oral history with everyone involved, the soldiers, the white students, the Little Rock Nine, their families. And so accidentally excavated this very painful part of my mother's story. And so it was a moment of reconciliation for us.
And we were talking last night about what we're going to talk about. And I think that a lot of my healing came about based on my relationships with other people and working with other people and learning. I mean, I'm listening to Avi. This country has all that, you know, everything that happened to his grandfather or happened in the Holocaust has happened here maybe 4 or 5 times, right? We are not without truth. We are not the thing, the shining whatever thing that we talk about on the hill. We're not even close, okay?
What you've learned all these years, whether it's US history or world history, like what if what you've learned about other people and their communities is just simply not true?
Yeah, when I think about fat bodies through the lens of kind of talking about the gaze, we're talking about, you know, we're definitely talking about the white gaze. We're talking about a very specific sort of Eurocentric white gaze. We're talking about a misogynist gaze or lens. And we're talking about, you know, this very specific kind of like way that capitalism becomes a lens or, you know, a gaze.
I've always been a storyteller. I think that stories have always been a healing modality for me. I remember a time when I was 6 years old in kindergarten, and I was still learning to speak English, and the school that I was in was not bilingual, so I struggled. And I was a very chatty little girl, very curious, and I would always talk in class. And I would find the students that spoke Spanish so that I could communicate with them. But I had a teacher who was not happy about that, so she would put tape over my mouth every time I spoke Spanish. And this was in the 80s, I mean, it's not that long ago. And so after that, I internalized the shame of speaking Spanish, right, which is a colonial practice. And so I stopped speaking Spanish for a very long time. But I always understood the power of language, the power of stories, the power of sharing what you have experienced, what you know, what you think about, what you're curious about.
Whenever I said, you know, becoming an anti-racist organization, the automatic response was, so you're a racist organization before that? And the truth of the matter is, yes, because for all the reasons that you're hearing over these last 2 days, right, the systems often force us to be, right? Colonization and the structures that we have in place, unless you are actively trying to work within those systems in an anti-racist way, you're very much promoting the racial ways of colonization.
I had a father that I met at the barbershop. He heard me speaking, and he pulled me to the side and said, listen, I would like to invite you to my house for dinner because my son wants to transition into female, and I'm going to be honest, I don't know how to handle it. I don't know anything about it. I love my child. I don't want him to feel like I'm not there for him, but I really don't know this is brand new to me. I don't know anything about it. And to hear you speak and your confidence and how well you carry yourself, I would love for you to be the person to help me and my wife understand her.
And I know that a lot of people might think, oh, X-Men, they're heroes, but what they don't realize is that these people have disabilities. You know, Professor X, he's in a wheelchair, right? Think about that for a minute. You know the guy with the blue hair, yellow glasses, he has that X-ray vision? Cyclops? He's a member of the low vision and blind community. See the girl with the green outfit there, Rogue, with the red hair. She's the Phoenix. And sometimes she has seizures and she'll pass out if she gets too emotional, if her emotions get too intense. Many people actually don't realize that about her. You know, when she gets overwhelmed, she'll pass out. And now, this is everybody's favorite, right? Wolverine, right? Everybody knows Wolverine. But there's some people that might not realize something. He has PTSD. He's been in many wars, and he has a lot of trauma in his history. And he's a very important member of the X-Men. But they don't marginalize him or push him to the side because of his PTSD. They see him as a valued member. And, you know, if you try to come up behind him to communicate with him, he'll just pull out his club. So everyone makes sure to respect his communication style and make sure that they're standing in front of him and be patient and take their time to communicate with him. They all make sure that they work together as a team.
In New Jersey, do you know 95% of the women in prison were sexually abused by their spouse, family member, or a stranger that they didn't even know, or went through domestic violence? Is freedom justice?
Dear New Jersey, I must tell you, it can be someone in your family that ends up on the other side of the law. Is justice freedom then?
Dear New Jersey, open up your eyes and see that our country is failing. We have the highest rate of incarceration in the entire world. Freedom is justice!
But one of the things I wanted to point out, or just like kind of like lift up in some of the things is, again, even throughout, when we started here with like the music and the movement, right, the different ways in which storytelling is done, right? These are intergenerational spaces that we're talking about here and that we're co-creating, co-constructing. Often through, I guess, another theme around this healing is around how we heal through the arts, right? Through using our hands, through moving our bodies, through just like meditating, visualizing, and also I would say through like sharing food and our tastes, right? That's another way of community building, right? These are ways that we communicate how in Spanish we would call saberes, our knowledges. And so often in a lot of our spaces of healing, our sanctuary spaces, we share a meal. And though that's not just because I'm always hungry, it's just the sense too of like when we are sharing a meal, we are also kind of like tasting a bit of our memories and history.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think there's some really, there's some threads that have been going on in each conversation that I think is just important to kind of keep in mind and take home points, which is that there is this relationship between healing and liberation. So we can't talk about someone's healing without actually changing the structural conditions in which they live in, and then addressing the ways in which they might be have internalized their own oppression.
I used to paint just for my own purposes of just creating beauty. And Michael Brown was murdered. My work shifted to really a cathartic healing mechanism for myself. I began creating work around what I was seeing and experiencing as a black man in America. And it was very visceral, it was very hard-hitting. I was often afraid to put it out in the world, but I did, and found the response from people was really surprising, that they got it, and that it did something for them, and it helped them process what they were experiencing.
It's amazing that healing could become something radical, but healing is political in the sense that, first of all, the harms are political, right? So the harm and suffering that people are experiencing is largely coming out of history, right? Carried, trauma makes home in wombs, right?
I was very dismissive of when people were talking about healing because I wasn't willing to gauge how I'd been harmed, right? And all of the things that have harmed me.